What I'm personally struggling with is trust. And I say that because I've had it help me with a handful of Excel things that it didn't quite do correctly. It's important to remember that AI is trained on a bunch of people who did that manual work in the first place and built all the building blocks from which AI can learn. That's that gut feel element that I feel like there's still just this human component that we know from our experience that would bring a great perspective to this potentially AI produced model.
Hello, and welcome to Tech for Finance, where we help finance professionals leverage technology to level up their lives. I'm your host, Adam Shilton, and in this episode, we're going to be chatting with Chris Reilly. Chris is founder of both Mission Capital Consulting and Financial Modeling Education, where he provides custom-built M&A and FP&A models for businesses and teaches advanced financial modeling to FP&A and PE professionals. After holding positions in consulting, corporate finance, and mid-market private equity, Chris decided to build his own business so he could spend more time with his wife and 3 kids. Chris lives in Colorado, which is a big outdoor state, and in his spare time likes golf, general fitness, and also video games. Before we start, if you like what you hear today, please make sure to subscribe to Tech for Finance on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. But for now, thanks for joining me today, Chris. It's really good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Adam. Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
No worries. So it's morning for you, evening for me. So no, it's all good. I'll try not to keep you too long in the middle of the day or working towards the middle of the day for you. So I guess getting straight into the good stuff. The point that stands out there is you basically deciding that you want to control your own schedule so that you can, spend more time with the people that matter most to you. And that's amazing. I mean, I've got 2 kids myself, as we were speaking earlier. A lot of people are a little bit scared at making that move, even if they're thinking about starting their own business. So I guess the first question is, for anybody that's thinking about going it alone, what would you say?
Yeah, it's a good question. I feel like actually now is the best time, at least in my career, for somebody to give that a shot, because we now live in this economy where you can have full-time work, but you also have theoretically some room on the side to pursue some kind of passion project that can be complementary to your full-time income. So there's a nice testing ground that's more acceptable now than was acceptable pre-COVID. So I think if you have the time and the interest, it's a great idea to just start building a passion project in your off hours. See if you can get a little bit of traction. For me, like tactically speaking, I found that posting content that I was really good at on LinkedIn was a quick way for me to gain traction and sort of like measure my results, as opposed to just like not really knowing where to start. So that was a great way to test the market and very easy and low lift, something you can do in your off time. And the only thing I'd say is if you are working for an employer, depending on the success of your part-time project, at some point you may need to get a blessing or disclosure from them that you can work on self-promotion in addition to working full-time on your full-time role. So that's really the only tricky part, but I'd say it's a perfect time to try it. Everybody's a little bit more flexible with lifestyle. We have a lot more technology in terms of communication and scalability than we did even a couple years ago. And again, if I was doing it all over, that's probably how I would do it. What I ended up doing was different. I actually didn't have a job at the time. I was just trying to build my own thing right during COVID. And I was actually pretty desperate. I was doing hourly work and I was trying to scale at the same time with no backbone of full-time income. I'd left my private equity job. And so it ended up working in the end. And sometimes that killer instinct of like, I have to make this work is also good. And I felt like that forced me to push through and like make things work in times when if I had a bailout, I may not have. But I'd say a much safer route now is let's take the full time thing, presuming you have enough time. And then in your part-time, work on trying to build this passion project and just see where it goes. Maybe it turns into something you can scale or maybe not, but it's a good time to try it in that downtime between your full-time work.
Thanks for that. And it makes me smile a little bit because I've listened to quite a lot on others that have decided to go it alone. And a lot of them said, like you, that, they went down the failure is not an option route. If you don't have any other options, then you've no choice but to make it work, right? And I think it's kind of it's kind of like, at some point you've got to rip off the band-aid or rip off the plaster, right? And just get stuck in, I guess. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with. It's that fear piece. It's that, I'm not going to have the monthly income. I can't guarantee that it's going to be a success. So I think it's fair what you're saying. And I don't know whether you follow him, but Justin Welsh, he's actually one of the influencers, if you like, that really promotes solopreneurship. Um, and his recommendations are to start with, like, just try and replace like one element of your expenses. So if you're paying utility bills, for example, start there. Make enough money just to cover that expense, and then slowly grow it from there. And I think that aligns with what you're saying there. Is if you do have the time, it's worth testing the water before you go all out and jump into the deep end, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I said you got to make your first dollar before you can make your 100th dollar. You just have to go step by step. And I think if you can get it to a point where you've replaced, 50 or 60% of your income, then maybe that is a good time to go all in. But some of the things you have to factor that are different from being a W-2 employee, at least in the US, is that you have to cover your own insurance, which is typically covered by an employer. It's also much harder to get a home loan because your W-2 income at least, proves out in theory some longevity. Whereas your own business, you need a lot more years of operating history. So there's some like red tape and admin frustration that can happen from going all in. You also pay a little more in tax. So like if you replace your income one to one, you're not really replacing your net income one to one because you're paying both the employer and the employee tax piece. So there's a lot of detail that goes into it once things start to scale. But a good litmus test to kick things off is, okay, if I can in my part-time spare time at least create a portion of my old income, well, that's pretty good. And then if you're over half, then maybe that's the time to consider going all in. But it's tricky for everybody. It kind of depends on everybody's family situation. If you have a spouse, if they're working or not, that factors into it too. And I mean, for us, I'm very fortunate. My wife works at the children's hospital. She's a nurse and she covers the insurance for our family. So that's not a business expense that I need to carry right now, which made starting it up much easier. So I didn't have to bear that expense early on. So again, that was just a unique situation that I was fortunate to take advantage of, but it wouldn't be the same for everybody. So you kind of have to, compare your new project in the whole lens of your entire life and what you're solving for.
Mhm. And I suppose, yeah, we'll come on to tools and stuff in a second. 'Cause of course, tech for finance, we need to talk about the tech at some point. But I suppose the last thing that I'll say regarding the solopreneurship and the going it alone is, I'm hoping with technology as it is now, it makes that initial phase of building, whether it's a website, whether it's just something like a simple newsletter landing page or something like that. We can get the stuff set up in minutes now, as opposed to previously when it take hours or days to learn how to create the website and then learn how to do whatever. So I'm optimistic that it's now becoming easier for people to start the passion projects and the side hustles. So we'll come on to the tech, I guess, in a bit. But before I forget, because we've got to assume a lot of the listeners here are still in full-time employment and maybe don't have ambitions to go it alone just yet, whether they're early in their finance career or they're just looking to learn more about tech and how that reflects in finance. But there's evidently a lot of skills that you probably picked up in working for yourself and being the founder of a business that you might not have considered could relate to being in employment. So I suppose the short version of that question is there anything that you've learned working for yourself that you think would be a useful skill to people that are employed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say the number one thing that I've learned working for myself is marketing and sales. Because coming from a finance background, I mostly had my head in spreadsheets all day and was very involved in like the technical side of the business. And especially as a junior employee, a lot of that work was handed to me. But especially when I worked for larger companies, smaller companies, it was a little bit different. You had to kind of go out and find your own work a little bit. But typically I was behind the scenes and being asked to complete projects. Working on my own, I figured out not only do I have to go find the work, which is hard, then I got to go do the work. But in order to find it, I have to be good at marketing and good at sales, which is something, a skill I'd never ever learned before. And I think if you can apply that to what I'll call a full time or FTE position, it's just really, really helpful because it'll start making you a little bit more visible in the organization, probably help you get up a little bit higher because at some point, regardless of company size, when you get to a high enough level, you are at the point of finding the work as opposed to doing the work. And so the sooner you can develop that skill of going out and actually bringing in new business to the company, I think that is a key thing as opposed to just kind of being a worker bee and cranking behind the scenes. And I think that was the biggest inflection point for me. Like I love to build financial models and that's my core skill. But in order to go find that, I had to learn how to sell and how to acquire those customers. And that's been the biggest change for me going from like more of an employee to an owner. So
That's fair. That's interesting. And coming to that, I suppose it comes back to building influence, doesn't it? And there's a lot of focus right now on small businesses as well as large businesses on the role of finance business partners and how you need to translate, finance information into a form that's understandable to the rest of the business. Um, and those skills always tend to come back to sales and marketing because you've got to argue a point of view. You've got to build a business case. You've got to influence as we said. So I think it's a fair shout. People don't often realize that they're selling sometimes, whereas, everybody sells. And I've mentioned the book before, Dan Pink, To Sell is Human. Even if you're not in sales, it's a book that's worth reading. Just because it's really good reading and it applies to everybody, not just to salespeople. So no, I think you're right there. Thanks for that, Chris. So I suppose coming back to what you mentioned there with being really good at building financial models, obviously I would recommend that everybody follows you on LinkedIn because you do some really great videos. I think you're up to 55,000 followers or something like that. So you must be doing something right, right? And of course, you've got the advantage of being really, really good with Excel. And of course, many people that work in finance love Excel. Even if they are using other software tools, you often find that they still revert back to, doing a lot of work in Excel because it's so flexible and something that they're used to, right? So when we look at building a model, and this does relate to tools, but of course, we've now got a generation of companies that are being developed that are trying to get finance teams to buy low code tools for specific purposes. And we've had some on the podcast, right? So we had Adam Sigornis, who does Flowcog, which is an FPA tool specifically for SaaS companies, which is really good. He's really, really found his niche there. And spoken to other people that are building stuff like ChatGPT into the likes of Zero and all of those sorts of things. So from your perspective, what are the pros and cons of, say, a preset, off-the-shelf low code tool versus, building your own model in Excel? Be good to hear your perspective on that.
yeah, it's an interesting question. I think at some point, every company that at least matures beyond, a small group of people and gets kind of like 50, 100 plus employees is going to need a more robust FP&A software type system. I think you can't rely on at least from a data repository. You need a true system for data. You could make an argument that you could run an operating model through Excel even for a company that size, which I have done before. So I think it's reasonable, but like your data needs to be in a secure place that's reliable. I would also say now with like the FP&A software that's out there, it's a great idea to also implement a tool like that for FP&A planning that you can bring in teams and run more live reports and get away from some of the pain points that exist with Excel. And so as an Excel guy, that might seem like, well, that's the opposite of what I would say. But the truth is Excel has its place when you start getting a little bit more complex in the M&A space, specifically related to EBITDA adjustments, layering in buyouts or multiple transactions. And every conversation I typically have with FP&A software that's usually the stumping point. They have great software that is for steady state, budget versus actuals, some really great SaaS tools to kind of aggregate all the products and or the contracts and recognize revenue. That's all well and good. But once you start getting into, we have to build an EBITDA schedule that's got 4 or 5 different tiers for different audiences. And then we have to factor in each and every buyout that we're going to do as like a roll up strategy and all the pro forma adjustments had we owned it the entire time. People say, well, yeah, you still kind of need Excel for that. And I agree. I think you do. I think, is there going to be a day when you can do all that through software? Maybe, but you start getting into the coding element of that software, and the whole sales pitch of that is no code. So I think data 100% needs to be in like a secure repository, and you can either siphon that into Excel if you want, or you can, layer it through FP&A software. Keeping things in Excel is of course, more finicky, more risk prone, but cheaper way to do something that also has more flexibility if you're taking your company out of the FP&A space and potentially into more of a roll up or M&A type landscape.
Hmm. And I did see one of your courses, so a bit of a plug here for you on the financial model education. But I think your terminology here, so the financial modeling for private equity, deep learning differentiator, learn to model a leveraged buyout or LBO. If you ever want a senior finance role, you need to understand how a transaction works, which is fair. I completely understand with that, and especially when businesses are looking for senior staff, it may be part of the job spec that you have had experience in that sort of area. And slightly different question, not on the list of topics at all, but for somebody who's a little bit more junior, sometimes they might have this sort of thing thrown on them, so they might not go into the role knowing that the company is planning, something going on in the future. So one day, oh, this is the route, this is what's happening, we need help and so on. So again, to shorten my question is, for anybody that's not got experience, that maybe ends up in a situation where they're having to tackle this sort of stuff, what would your recommendations be?
I think it's to distill it down into its most simplest form is a business can kind of operate like a home, in that at some point it may be eligible for sale. And I think we're all semi familiar with the fact that like you can buy a home, it appreciates in value, and then if and when the time is right, you can bring it out to market and sell it. And conceptually, a business operates in the same way. It's either acquired in the first place or potentially started by founders. They will work their hardest to improve the business and grow it, and either keep it forever if they want, or sell it, just like you might sell a house. And so, for a more junior finance professional, the way a business is sold is generally by assessing the profitability of the company and the quality of the financials. And the better the profitability and the better the quality of those numbers, the higher price that the company will fetch at auction or however it's sold in the market. And so it's getting an understanding of the income statement. That's really the key piece of like, where do I start the income statement? Then at the bottom of that income statement, we're only going to be going to net income for GAAP accounting purposes, at least in the US. But we build an ancillary schedule called the EBITDA schedule, which is designed to normalize the profitability a little bit. And there's a whole debate you can have on EBITDA, whether it's good or bad. And I know both sides of that argument, but for purposes of our discussion here, typically the EBITDA is used as some kind of market multiple or comparison to other companies that were sold. And so if you can calculate the EBITDA for your business, you have a great starting point of what your company might be worth in the open market. And that kicks off the conversation. So to zoom out, somebody who's junior, mastery of the P&L, understanding how to build that EBITDA schedule, that will immediately kind of get you a seat at the table. If you're in an M&A situation where we're saying, hey, we might be going out to market, what do we do and where do we start?
And coming back to this discussion earlier, I mean, I suppose if people are unfamiliar with how to build something like an EBITDA schedule or stuff like that, providing the data is decent, anybody who knows how that works could essentially build that in Excel, for example, right? Providing you've got that core financial data, you can at least start generating some of those numbers. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's correct. Everything that you need is in the income statement, at least to build your generic EBITDA. And I imagine a lot of FP&A software could probably build that too. Where it starts getting creative is, and this is what people tend to dislike about EBITDA, is you get a lot of discretionary adjustments that come from the management team where one-time items might be buried in certain expenses. And it's your job as the business owner or the analyst in this case to help the team pull out that information to build an adjusted EBITDA schedule to, again, you're just doing your best effort to normalize the profitability. And a good example could be, your advertising expense is $1 million, but 500,000 of that was campaign you're never going to do again. You could argue, well, there's $500,000 of expense that we're not going to have going forward. That should be sitting in my EBITDA schedule because on a normalized basis, my profitability should be 500,000 greater if nothing else changes. So that's the creativity that comes into like layer two, layer three of the EBITDA schedule. And that's where a lot of the negotiation comes from because a buyer is going to have a different opinion than a seller on the legitimacy of those adjustments. And that's also where I feel like FP&A software tends to break down a little bit, at least from the ones I've seen. There could be other ones out there that handle this, but how do you get in there and sort of hand pick out adjustments for purposes of your valuation? And then at that point, how different really are you than doing it in Excel in the first place? So that's where that breakdown, I think, comes a little bit. But to zoom out, you do have the majority of that information in the income statement, and a junior finance professional can pull most of it right from that place.
And have you got any courses that revolve around EBITDA or any recommendations for people looking to build their knowledge there?
Oh yeah, and not to plug it too hard, but like yeah. So my LBO course is all about that. It's like brick by brick, building up a buyout transaction, a mid-market US company. It goes through all the EBITDA stuff, the new debt, the new equity, and like how to propose a recommendation to the managing partner. It comes from a perspective of a private equity firm, but it's equally applicable to somebody in FP&A who might be on the company side as opposed to the buy side. So yeah, I include that in all of the content that I put together because I came from private equity and we basically like lived and died by EBITDA, whether that was like the right way to do it or not. That's just what the world revolved around. So all my content builds to EBITDA. But the nice thing is like, there's a lot of great free content out there on EBITDA. You can do research on YouTube, which of course I've done plenty of. There are also a bunch of great LinkedIn personalities that put out really nice content on that. So there's plenty of free stuff too. But it's when it gets to the modeling piece, it's just nice to see like how all the pieces come together to know how to build it. But it's such a ubiquitous topic. There's a lot of free content out there that you can find on it.
Yeah. And we'll put some links in the show notes. I think the most recent one I saw was it, and I might be really mispronouncing her name here, Oana Labes or Labes, Labes, I think is the surname. I think I've seen quite a lot from her recently about EBITDA, so I'll see whether I can pull out some posts as well and put them in the show notes if they're useful to people as well. So
Yeah. I've actually spoken to her a few times. She has really, really informative content, especially around the EBITDA area. And even from my private equity background, I feel like reading her stuff, I learned a lot. So I would definitely recommend just, finding her profile and reading her stuff because it's helped me, especially in like the M&A, FP&A space in terms of, she's very good at like simplifying a lot of concepts. So that just helps me when I'm trying to communicate to clients, the same kind of thing. So definitely recommend checking out her profile.
yeah, and she's got a newsletter as well called the Finance Gem that I'm subscribed to. That's really good too. So all good. So moving more into the tech then. So without laboring the point too much, because I've had a lot of conversations and a lot of the recent podcast content has been around AI and ChatGPT. I think we need to recognize it, because it's getting to the point now where it just can't be ignored, right? In the same way that the internet became prolific, I think generative AI or AI in general is going to be the next, I suppose, a lot of people compare it to, industrial revolutions and all that sort of stuff where, things just speed up really, really quickly. And I don't deny that. But I think at the same time, there is also a lot of, I won't say misleading, but there is a lot of unuseful content being bandied around at the moment just because it is such a buzzword. And I did a post on it this morning. LinkedIn at the moment just seems to be a breeding ground for people recommending a list of 50 AI tools. And with a lot of people not having actually researched or signed up or given the tools a go. And it's a bit of a bit of bit of a side note, but yeah, I've spent quite a lot of time in AI tools over the past month or so, right? Because it's part of what I do. It's an interest for me, and a lot of the AI tools at the moment, people are still testing the water to see whether people actually want it. So a lot of them, you'll end up on the website and say, "Oh, add to the wait list." And that's not a wait list to say, "Oh, we're actually building this." Sometimes it's a wait list just to see whether they do want to build it or not. It's like a pre-qualification of whether the product is viable or not. So just because you're on a wait list doesn't mean that the product is ever actually going to exist. But the reason I mention that is probably 50, 60% of the tools that I was looking at, not particularly good, or just reiterations of another tool that's good that people are trying to. Do you see what I'm saying? So I think when we look at these, we need to be mindful of the fact that just because AI is now more accessible and there's more tools available doesn't mean that we need to completely upend the way that we've been working, for the past however many years. So I suppose the question for you, and I know it's still kind of early days for you looking into some of these AI tools, which I understand, but it'd be good to get your impression for what you think, at least in the short term, AI just can't make up for, right? Because we know that you can start plugging in ChatGPT to spreadsheets now, and that's fine, but it'll only surface information that exists on the spreadsheet. If you're plugging it into that data source, yes, you could potentially say, look at the data on this spreadsheet and then compare that to an industry benchmark, for example. But even still, you've got to make sure that you're really, really there with the accuracy, because you can't guarantee that the benchmark that it's finding for you is accurate, for example. You're just taking that generative AI and whatever it's been trained with as gospel, right? And then what I'm seeing as well at the moment is another big gap with context. And this I think is where Adam at Flowcog's doing really good, is he's training that context specifically for people in SaaS into the platform, so that he knows that when they ask the AI a question, he's going to give more of a contextual response than just a random, "This is something that we found that we were trained with." So I suppose that's a long question, but the short question is, what are the fundamental bits of information that AI just won't be able to surface from an organization in terms of context? And what skills do you think are still fundamental in building financial models that AI potentially is doing quite poorly at the moment?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think right now for me the biggest thing is still trust. It's so early, and what I'm finding is that you can use, these AI models for a lot of valuable stuff. And I've done it a ton. I've used it to help me with Excel files, and I've used it on the content side too. And it certainly is very impressive and very scalable. But what I'm personally struggling with is trust. And I say that because I've had it help me with a handful of Excel things that it didn't quite do correctly. Like, it's run some calculations wrong, or, if you're a true Excel nerd, it was giving me like some indirect recommendations to make text-based formulas, which I just wouldn't normally do because it sets your file up for a lot of risk. And so when I could just sort of pull out of my hat a better solution than AI could come up with for something that I think it should be good at, like an Excel problem or something that's very definitional based, I start to lose trust. And so I have no doubt that's going to improve. There's going to be GPT 5, 6, 7, whatever it's going to be, and it's going to get better and better, and it's going to get integrated into spreadsheets with a lot more context. But right now, I feel like it kind of exists in a vacuum a little bit for me. And what I'm using it for, that I find is a great use case, is related to content that I'm already pretty good at, or I already have a decent idea of what the results should look like, but I kind of want to sanity check or double check my thought process. And especially from a modeling perspective, I like having it double check some of my accounting logic. Like, I was working on a working capital build the other day of linking up the inventory, the accounts payable, and the accounts receivable and flowing it all through the income statement. And I was just asking, hey, I'm trying to think about this relationship. And it was sort of validating what I was thinking. And it helped me make a nice model. So I think that's a perfect use case for it now. But it's obviously it can be taken advantage of. It can definitely be abused. I get really scared when people get lazy about it and they just ask it questions without thinking. It kind of turns our brains off and we copy paste and just, shotgun this content out there because it's done the work for us. But I think that's going to change. I mean, it's only been out since November, I think, which is kind of crazy to me. And it's become such a common thing we use in everyday life, at least those of us who are kind of focused in this sort of tech content space. Um, so it's early, but the future kind of worries me a little bit because it is so powerful and everything is AI-ified right now. It's images and video and content and modeling and like everywhere you look, somebody's got AI sprinkled on something. It kind of feels like the blockchain hype from a couple of years ago where it's just sort of everywhere. So, you know, I don't I don't really know what's gonna happen with it. I think it's just interesting to watch it play out real time. It's good to be involved in it and use it as a reliable assistant, and just see how that contextual functionality for it changes down the road.
And nobody's got a crystal ball, right? And I think that's what unsettles people the most is, you've got some very influential people across the world that are saying stuff like, we need to put the brakes on it for 6 months, and there's one argument to say that some of those influential people are behind in terms of their own technology. So it's kind of oh, you need to slow down. We need to catch up a little bit. But I think part of it is also the more founded argument in my view, which is how do we police it? How do we ensure it's secure? Because we've heard stories, I think, there was a ban of it in Italy or ChatGPT specifically in Italy because of whether it's a data breach or something like that. So those are real scenarios that we've got to be mindful of. But in terms of that hockey stick for where we are now and the next iteration, which again, we've got to assume that the jump between GPT-3 and GPT-4 is going to be substantially more with the jump from GPT-4 to GPT-5. And again, we don't know what that's going to look like. And I think the whole concept of artificial general intelligence, which is when we're getting into AI thinking for itself, is, the real scary bit, because as I spoke about in the interview with Glenn Hopper, and, then you start getting into the territory of, right, well, when AI can do everything, what does everybody else do? Do you have the concept of universal income? Are you just given, a function to do because the AI says that based on your skills, you're best at doing this, and this is how you need to conform? But again, I don't get too far ahead with that. But I think what you said coming back there relating to accuracy and assistance for where we are now, because again, we can only comment on where we are now. I think you've hit the nail on the head whereby, and Microsoft are telling it Copilot because they're going to build it into Office, right? I think they already have. It's just not, I don't think publicly available yet. But it's going to be Clippy 2.0, right? Where you've got your little thing in the bottom right of the screen where it says, oh, I see you're trying to do this. What do you think about doing that? And that should speed up the workflow with the more administrative stuff. So for people like you and I that have way too much to do and not enough time to do it, I think that's where the real wins are. I think for me, the concern is, as you say, for the people that are maybe growing up with this technology that don't have the experience and having had to do everything manually to begin with, there is that risk, as you say, that people end up not thinking for themselves anymore, and we could have this whole new generation of people that are just basically giving AI, owners to control everything. Yes. I think what I'd say there is there's a lot to be said sometimes of going back to basics and just doing stuff manually, and going through the step by step, and building something from scratch, because it's only then when you've got that foundation, correct me if I'm wrong, that you're going to be able to ask the AI better questions in the future. There's some things in terms of fundamental skills that, AI is just not going to be able to emulate.
Right. And I think, it's important to remember that AI is trained on a bunch of people who did that manual work in the first place and built all the building blocks, from which AI can learn. If we just let it kind of take over, it stops getting the building blocks that it needs that were sort of human developed in the first place. Now, if it learns to think for itself, who knows? But then we're like kind of off in speculating. And I feel like right now, the great use case for it and sort of my hope for it is, somebody who's a little more seasoned in their career and knows how to use it responsibly and can understand its power. I want to use it to make my work more efficient so I can help more clients, right? Ideally, I'd love to say, hey, instead of me cranking out this three-statement model AI, why don't you do it so that I can actually look at the results and we have a faster conversation with the client? And then for me, from a revenue perspective, I could get away from charging hourly if I was charging hourly for somebody and do a more value-based contract. And it's kind of a win-win for everybody. So I could see where scaling the technology in that sense is great for somebody in a position who kind of knows, or at least the best of their ability, how to use it responsibly. What I worry about more is you get away from finance or whatever else. Like, I'm thrilled that I'm not in high school right now and have the ability to use AI to like put out some English paper that I have, didn't read the book for or whatever else. I can imagine that that is exhausting for teachers. And while it seems cool for students, and I'm sure I would find it cool if I was in high school, it just sets a dangerous precedent for kind of softening our brains, not really challenging ourselves to learn in the classic way. And it just can create a lot of confusion and misinformation for people that are growing up with this technology. And so I can really see it going both ways, where you've got the core users that want to use it for the best intentions to the best of its ability, and then people that either don't want to use it for the right reasons or are even unaware that they're using it for the wrong reasons. And that could really create this split in where the technology helps and hurts everybody.
Mm. And it comes back to that point again about, does education need to shift? And I think the short answer to that is yes. And my own perspective has always been that I didn't retain any knowledge from my early education. All of those biology and chemistry classes and all that sort of stuff. Anybody ask me now what I learned during that time, I'd come back saying, I honestly can't remember, you know, and, and it's because maybe it's just my learning style, but I do believe that people learn by doing, so if you're not taking those concepts and actually doing something with them, then why would your brain need to retain them? Because it's learning about other stuff, right? So I've always thought, even, before ChatGPT, that there were some fundamental changes needed, in terms of core life skills. I don't think there was enough focus on diet and nutrition, for example. Entrepreneurship, you don't start getting into that sort of territory until you choose to do it for university or college or whatever it happens to be. So, but I think that's going to be even more relevant now because, you take away the majority of the factual based stuff because an AI can just throw information at you left, right, and center. All you've got to do is know how to ask it the right question. But then the next question is more, I guess, going down the philosophical angle, which is, right, well, how do we think? How do we provide value? What skills do we need that are outside just learning concepts? And my prediction as well, and we'll have to see what happens. But obviously, AI is now getting to the point where people can use AI to build AI tools. They can use it to write code and all of that sort of stuff. But as I mentioned previously, people can also use it to build really rubbish products in the same way that people would build rubbish products and fail even pre-AI. Yeah. So I think that the same rules still stand. It is still going to be about quality of ideas. It doesn't matter how much tech you've got backing you up in the background if the output is rubbish. So I think that needs to be a focus for people. It's one thing to do stuff quickly. It's another thing to do stuff quickly and produce a quality output, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's a great point. Yeah.
So going back a little bit then, because sorry, I've gone off on one of my rants there a little bit. I apologize. But coming back to the stuff that people still have the advantage with, right? So we've still got the ability to work from experience, build that context, and provide that judgment, to validate accuracy and that sort of stuff. So coming back to the sort of stuff that you do, whether it's, an M&A project or, building a model, there are points when building that you do need to make a judgment. And let's not necessarily call it gut feel, because, it's always a bit risky when you start relying on gut feel. I do like trying to say it needs to be the correct balance of data and gut feel, right? But AI at the moment, it can't produce that gut feel, and coming back to what you said earlier about, do we need to include this as something that's regular, or is it always going to be a one-off? So I'd love to get your perspective on how important do you think that human perspective and that gut feel with something like, an M&A project, still warrants human effort as opposed to AI?
Yeah, I think a great example I can draw on is, so I've helped out an agriculture company for many, many years. And from an AI perspective, whether it could do this now or not, you basically give it the historical data for however much you want, hook it up to, economic trends and whatever else, and it will probably generate a reasonable forecast, of what the business might do in the future. But agriculture especially is a tricky business because it's so seasonal and it's so dependent on weather. And typically the type of person who is kind of making sales in ag is not the kind of person that's making a financial model. And so what the technology cannot do is it can't relate to the person who's just sort of been out in the field, who knows the local market, who knows how to sell, who just has a sense of what the company is going to be doing for their specific products because they've been doing it for so long. And that's that gut feel element that I feel like there's still just this human component that we know from our experience that would bring a great perspective to this potentially AI produced model that's hooked up to all these different data sources. But it's never going to be, I think it always needs to be double checked by the people that have this lifelong expertise and experience in their field. And again, I think ag is such a good example because AI could come up with this amazing model that's hooked up to, crop data, weather data, historical data, economic data, anything else, and it just might not rain next year. It was a good model to start, but it's kind of useless at the end of the day. Now, a person can't predict whether it's going to rain either, right? But it's nice to have them have that double checking ability to what the technology can produce. So I hope that our ability to leverage gut feel based on experience remains, and that we can use AI as a great sanity check, as a great double checking tool. That's like a, horse-powered 10 analysts in one kind of tool, but that we don't blindly rely on it to set our forecast.
Mm. And you're dead right, and it's probably not accessible to the smaller end of the market right now, right? But there are a number of enterprise FP&A platforms that do allow you to hook up external data, whether it's in the form of weather or, fill in the gap. And I know you and I both know Paul Barnhurst. You've been on FP&A today, haven't you?
Yeah.
He was on I think he was guest number 5 on this podcast actually, but he was talking in those terms, and that was pre-ChatGPT, right? But you're absolutely right. A prediction is still a prediction. I'm not saying number of data points is irrelevant, because if the data points are reasonably accurate and AI it's got lots of data when it comes to history, it can infer quite a lot. But, I think weather's a great example because you can have as many past data points on the weather, but that doesn't necessarily mean that is 100% going to happen, in the future. And I'm sure there's crossovers of different industries that probably don't have time to go into today. The other one interested actually, and I don't know whether you saw it, and I can't remember whether it was today or a few days ago. I believe Bloomberg have just released their own like AI tool called like Bloomberg GPT or something like that. I might be making a hash of the name. And I don't know anything about it, but my guess is it is a chat tool that you can use to quickly gain information on financial markets and that sort of stuff. And it immediately made me panic a little bit, because are we now getting to a situation now as well where if you do have cash in the bank, and because AI is hooked up to a load of historic data points about where a market didn't do well, are people just going to ask ChatGPT, or what stock should I invest in? And I find that terrifying. I don't know whether you do.
Oh yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, I think asking a computer for investment advice, it has twofold. I mean, if you're assuming it's going to be all technically based and you're a technical trader using, all the different trend lines and whatnot, that's one approach. But I think you could maybe use AI to recommend a portfolio based strategy where you're putting in the same dollar amount every single time. And it's an emotionless business model where hopefully you hit it right 60% of the time. That's one approach. But if you just kind of a mom and pop and like asking it, well, what should I do here? I mean, I just don't feel like that's a great approach, but I think now somebody just totally weighing that too, going by their gut also isn't a great approach, necessarily. So I just, it's more as opposed to it giving financial advice. I just more worry about people mentally like handing over the keys to this technology and just letting it do what it wants. And okay, I analyze the news and the past market and correlation between the last 9 recessions. And so like, let's just buy a bunch of put options and let it ride. That stuff to me is just kind of a scary way. And I think a way that people could really lose their shirts on investing when like the smarter thing was maybe to just do nothing, keep it in cash or whatever else. So yeah, I actually hadn't seen the Bloomberg thing, but again, it doesn't surprise me because I feel like, the acronym GPT is everywhere and AI and whatever else. And it's just getting stamped on the end of stuff, just like the Kodak blockchain thing from whatever year that was, so I'm not surprised at all. And it's all the rage right now. So I know it's everywhere. I'm kind of hoping it maybe settles out a little bit, and we kind of get back to it's a tool that's here to help us, but not a tool that's designed to take us over and make our decisions for us.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I've just looked up now. It is literally called Bloomberg GPT. A 50 billion parameter language model that's trained on a wide range of financial data. So,
Sound cool?
I don't know whether it is actually launched yet. So due to be launched 2 days ago. So I don't know whether it's actually here yet. Might be here by the time the podcast's out, but we'll have to see it. But something in terms of, because you mentioned decisions there. Again, this doesn't really relate to our conversation either, but we're talking about it now. Is I struggle quite a lot with decision fatigue, whether you do as well. What do I focus on? What's my priority? What's next? How do I organize my to-do list and all that sort of stuff? And I guess to the point where I've got so much going on with work and so much in my head that it comes to personal decisions. And I sometimes just don't have the mental capacity to think about what is generally simple stuff, and what I have found quite useful recently, and again, it's only for those sort of really low risk decisions when you want a sounding board, but to have a chat bot, and I don't think it's therapy, not quite into therapy to the point where, but say, so I'm going to need a new car at some point because my wife, like you guys, I mean, she wants to have kid number 3 at some point. So the car at the moment, isn't big enough. She's got a little tiny car. So that'll be the next thing, getting a new car. Because there's all sorts of different finance models. You've got personal hire purchase, lease contracts, you've got getting a bank loan, all of that sort of stuff. And for me to even think about that sort of stuff at the moment, just don't have the mental capacity. So putting it into ChatGPT, and again, I won't make my decision solely on this, but just having a sounding board to say, these are my 3 options. These are what sort of cars I'm looking at, narrow down my options. At least as a first pass, it takes a little bit of that, mental fatigue away from the whole process. Yeah, but there's a balance, isn't there? That's not investing £10,000, a stock. You see what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, no, I have found it's actually surprisingly good at trying to help you relate to real life scenarios a little bit where it's, hey, I've got this going on and what do you think? It does spit out a decent list of ideas for you to weigh some options. And yeah, it can sort of be like a helpful resource to organize your thoughts. And I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I'm a one person business. I have three kids. I mean, it's on my mind constantly of how am I going to grow the business? How am I going to make sure the business doesn't crash and, help take care of my family? And, sometimes well, if you appreciate this, I run my calendar through AI. So I like AI. It helps me, right? It helps me get organized on what I'm going to do next. That's kind of one way of doing it. Anything I can do to leverage it to clear up some of that mental capacity so that when I am with family, I can be present on that and not always have my head thinking about what I got to do with the business next because there's no break. So I feel like, that's a great way to use it to free up some of that headspace because we all do have a lot going on, whether you're a business owner or you're a full-time employee. Just we have a lot of things to balance. And I haven't I haven't used it quite as much in sort of like that personal life context, like you mentioned, but once or twice. And I'm definitely like, wow, it's certainly interesting. It certainly provides a handful of like decent recommendations and great way to just get your thoughts organized and like clear up some of that mental capacity.
Mm, mm. And you say you run your calendar through AI. Is that a specific tool or?
Yeah. So it's actually the tool called Motion, which I like a lot. It's probably 80% good. It's got some bugs, but it's it's cool. The short of it is not to like overly pitch it, but like you kind of put in what you got to do, give it the relative priority, and it will spit it out back on your calendar in order of priority and go around your meetings and whatever else you have. So you gotta stay on top of it. It's a tool, right? If you forget to put something in, it's not going to be there. But I actually really like it, and like they have a half decent app on their phone that's not great, but like I'll say to myself, oh, I've got to get back to my tax guy. Like I'll put a thing in the app that just says do that and do it right away. And it will prioritize that task above everything else to do on my list. So it's nice. I've learned to use it again well enough to get the job done to save me time. Is it perfect? No. Right. Are there things I'd love to change? Sure. And can I get like lost in the system sometimes? Like, oh, I want to like over automate it and make it like so sweet. And then I find I'm wasting time. Yes, that happens too. So like you have to learn the learning curve and get used to it. But now that I've got it, I just keep it up. I keep looking to my left here. It's on this other monitor. I say, okay, I got that to do next. And that would be a good way to prioritize my time. And that's been a great way for me to leverage AI to stay organized. So yeah, the thing is called Motion. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we've had Motion recommended before. I've used Motion. I've used a similar tool called SchedPal. I don't know whether they're still going, but that worked quite well for a time. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's great. There's a guy called Howard Tunnicliffe here in the UK who's a finance director for The Economist. And I set him a challenge a few weeks ago because he's a pen and paper guy, right? So you need to at least start using some tech to at least do a brain dump, whether it's a virtual notepad or just a task management app, just to get it off paper and out of your head and into something like that. And I did recommend that he try a scheduling tool. So I recommended Motion and he had a go. And in the response put together when he was doing a review, his comment was basically too much AI for me. And for him, just getting sort of the fundamentals of the cloud notes and the cloud task management was enough to then go to that next level. Somebody who isn't as, he admits himself that he's a bit of a technophobe, to go in and set up something like Motion. He just found it quite fatiguing. He said he could 100% see the use case for it. In the week that he had to try all these tools. He said, look, as you say, the learning curve is too much. And I suppose that's another takeaway that I'd give people listening. We mentioned how many AI tools are appearing, left, right, and center. And they've got bright, shiny business cases and, flashing lights, use this tool to generate your presentations for you. And I'm guilty. Some of them work really, really well. Or use this AI to do that. And without even knowing it, you've spent hours with this particular tool, trying to understand the way that it works on the basis that it can help you with that business case. But actually, when you take a step back and think, hang on, I could have probably done that quicker, like without using the tool. Do you see what I mean? So my recommendation is spend like half an hour like experimenting, but then past that, if you don't see the immediate result from just move on, because otherwise you could spend forever in a day experimenting with all these tools and just lose a load of time for no reason.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think, another thing that's important to remember is even though we have amazing software, it's hard as people to change our behavior. So to get this AI tool that you have to onboard and learn and then ultimately actually use it to change your behavior. I mean, that's a big shift that you have to make. And so I think I like your recommendation of like, spend 20, 30 minutes on it. If you like it, cool, maybe give it a try. And if not, just call it a day and move on. And I've done that with a handful of software, like to, automate presentations, automate whatever else. And I just find, man, this is too hard. This is too hard to onboard, or I don't have the patience for this, or I could just pull together some piece of crap in PowerPoint that is at least better than or faster than, the pretty graphics that this thing is going to generate theoretically on my behalf. So yeah, there's a key lesson there of like you can get lost in these tools because they're so shiny and cool, but are they really helping you get closer to your long-term goal? Are they really buying you an extra hour during the week to like, make it on time for dinner? Or is it just some other tool that's gonna, occupy your brain capacity that you maybe would have had if you did nothing in the first place?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it. I'm conscious of your time, Chris. We've come up to an hour, but have you got another 5 minutes or so? Hold on.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yep.
Okay, so coming back to what you do day to day then, and this is more of a focus on tech, right? So you talked a little bit about, more specifically the point at which, a low code tool might not work because the complexity's got to the point where, there needs to be that extra input, use the example of, M&A and all that sort of stuff. So just day to day, when you are approaching your work, say somebody's asked you to build a model or do whatever, what are the fundamentals for you? Do you start in Excel? Do you have a template you work from? Can you talk us through the process? I mean, I don't know whether you're using AI as part of any of the stuff that you generate at the moment. It would be good to get an idea of your step by step and what sort of tools do you use to facilitate that end result. If you could spend 5 minutes just walking us through that.
Yeah, sure. So I would actually say my approach is probably surprisingly old school compared to all the templates and AI that is out there. I pretty much live in Excel. I do a lot of work in Google Sheets now, but mostly Excel. I do have some template based models because every business at some point or another can roll up into the three statements. And so I'll have pre-built income statement, balance sheet, statement of cash flows. And a lot of that is automated and formulaically built. And what I will do is just manipulate a handful of accounts. I'll basically take a company's chart of accounts in one column and then the column next to it, map them according to the buckets that I want them to go in the three statements, like revenue or headcount or on the balance sheet, accounts receivable. And so long as I have them grouped like that, then at the the level, the three statement level, it should sort of flow automatically. So that's a template based approach I take to most mid market companies. Where the customization comes in is actually building out typically elements of the P&L. Like if you're going to model out the revenue, the way I model out the revenue for an agricultural company is much different than a trucking company, different than a SaaS company. Not because the three statements are all that different. They're going to be the same. It's the inputs, it's the underlying pieces that you have to build to get it to work so it fits that business. So I'll have a bunch of underlying schedules where I meet with the management teams and map out exactly how they grow their business. And then that flows into my three statement model from like a modeling perspective. So the structure is typically like I got raw data from their accounting system. That's one. Let's get the history in there. Then the middle section is now let's have tactical discussions on how does the business actually work. Let's build that underlying detail. All of that subtotals into the three statement model in its respective position. And then the three statement model runs automatically because that's pretty much template based. And then the summaries on top of that are also pretty much template based because I'm just pulling information from the three statement model. So it's kind of like you know, it's almost like a 50-50 approach. People say 80-20, but really like the three statement model is only about 50% of it because there's so much that goes underneath the model to get the underlying metrics correct and then to page your summaries so that your KPIs are relevant to the business at hand. So I'd say it's fairly manual. I'm still in models, customizing them as much as I can, trying to make them custom fit for the company. But then the updating piece is very streamlined and that's quick. And we dump in the new financials, flick a switch, and boom, and it's kind of done. Um, so it's old school on the modeling side. When I do my content and marketing business, that's a little bit different. I try to use a lot more technology for that in terms of sometimes I use AI. I don't use it a ton. But I'll do this for like idea generation. Sometimes I'll also use a scheduler to pre-schedule all my social media posts. I use another software to analyze the data. And so there's a lot of software for me on the content side. So I can see what's working for my marketing because my marketing brings in the clients to help me build those models. Right. So once you get into the client piece, it's much more manual and old school in nature, but the tip of the spear has a lot more tech to it.
Mm. I guess coming back and just summarizing it, probably, our entire conversation today, just hearing you talk through that model is that a huge amount of your work is based on that understanding and understanding those KPIs, and I think that's still the biggest gap, isn't it? So it's what we've got to be mindful of. It's your experience, it's the experience of the people running the company based on how well they know their business that then allows you to put the data together, and I don't know when it will come, but, maybe in the future, there's a world where, you give an AI a type of business and it immediately knows what the KPI should be, and you give it, an output to say, this is the model we want to produce and it fills in the gaps. But for me, I think it's still really, really far away.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it would surprise me if that is the future at some point. You have an encrypted AI, so you could give it the chart of accounts, say, here's what we need and have it spit it all out. And, that would be an awesome tool. Like I'd love to see it. I'd love to see how it would work. I think the tale of building trust around that, that's a much longer sell. That's a much longer tail. I think the technology is there much sooner than the reliability. But it wouldn't surprise me if it comes. I mean, it's at the end of the day, whether we're human or artificial, we're all doing our best to make data driven decisions about the future, even if that data is kind of gut feel. Gut feel is still just another data point. So wouldn't surprise me if we have such an aggregated amount of data that we can spit out these forecast models. But I think for a very, very long time, there's going to need some element of human double check before we put it into action because people still have to do the work, at least for now. Until we all have it, like AI integrated into our brain stems or something and the computer's working for us, we still have to look at the output and say, okay, somebody's actually got to go do that. It's one thing to make a pretty model and have it look nice, but who's going to be out knocking on doors or picking up the phone or, who knows whatever tech we're using at that time. But some human has to actually achieve those results for our model to be worth, I think, the day.
100%. No, that's great, Chris. Really appreciate that. So the last question is the question that I always ask. You mentioned motion as something that helps you with your scheduling. Obviously, we know that you're a big fan of Excel. So you can't say either of those two, nor can you say your smartphone because that's a cop out. But the question is, if there was one or gadget in either your personal or professional life that you are completely reliant on that you couldn't live without, what would it be?
Oh, interesting. That's a good question. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is on my phone. Um, the question I couldn't live without.
We've had Audible, had Spotify from a personal perspective. We've had Angel. She's got an app that she uses for chopping up her videos and doing captions and all that sort of stuff. So if it's fine, if you want to reserve your answer and then we can pick up at late date, that's absolutely fine.
No, I mean, if can I pick something on the phone? Because I have Spotify and
Yeah.
Audible on the phone. Oh, okay. Yeah. Then I would say that I truly couldn't live without. This is so simple, but it's just iChat. Because just the texting platform. Because with the with the 3 kids and me working and my wife working, we just need to be in communication at all times to like manage and navigate the family. And so, I feel like, you can't always pick up the phone and call somebody. So just the ability to communicate to keep the family organized. I think that'd be like the number one thing. That would be really, if I couldn't do that. Everything else I might be able to just wing it. But I think just having the semi-live communication to keep the family organized, if I could not put up that.
And so that's interesting. So over here in the UK, and I don't know how it differs in the States, but people tend to favor WhatsApp over the standard iMessaging.
Mm,
So
interesting.
yeah, but I don't know. I mean, there's a big thing about it being more secure than I can't remember, but for whatever reason, I can't figure it out. People decided that they were going to use WhatsApp for IMs over uh, iMessages, but either way, who knows? Who knows?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I've used both, but I said the iChat is pretty common over here, and that's what we use it most of the time.
Yeah. And it's a recommendation for you, and I'm really annoyed because I can't remember the name. But it is a family-based AI assistant, and I will track it down. I'll put it in the show notes and I'll send it across to you. But it is an AI. I think it's like a virtual assistant that is solely geared around making family life easier. So like shopping lists, activities that need to be scheduled, all of that sort of stuff. And I saw the marketing for it and I thought, that's amazing. That looks really good. And I think I ended up on the wait list. Another one of those tools where there's a wait list, right?
Right.
If I find it and dig it out, I'll send it along to you. Again, it might fall into that category of one of those tools where you give up after half an hour. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But no,
Oh, yeah. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. Definitely.
mm, but really good to have you on. So before we leave, where can people find more about you? I'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Where else?
Yeah, I mean, so LinkedIn is of course number one. That's kind of my primary marketing strategy. I try to, yeah, I mean, I build a business through that, but I'm always posting finance content, modeling content, all the time on there. It's been a great channel for me. And then, that I have another website for my consulting called, missioncapitalco.com. That's the more tactical, FP&A and M&A work that I'll do for clients. And then, through my LinkedIn, I've also got other website for my courses and stuff. It's technically called privateequitymodeling.thinkific.com, which is a very long URL. I'm working on changing that. So, you keep that one out of the show notes, but I'd say LinkedIn is probably the number one. I'm pretty responsive on there. I like to get to know people, and that's where I put a lot of my best content out so people can get to know me a little better, kind of what I'm all about.
Fine. And you've got the link in your LinkedIn bio is a split link, isn't it? I don't know whether is it Linktree or something like that you use?
Linktree. Yep,
Yeah,
Linktree.
okay. So basically click on that one link and it'll give everybody a link to all of your other resources as well there as well. So yeah, LinkedIn first, click the link in the bio and well, I'll put all the other links in the show notes as well. So no,
Yeah, perfect. That's the best place. Right.
perfect. Absolute pleasure, Chris. I'll let you get off. But once again, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled to be here. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
No worries, Chris. See you later. Cheers.